Hello again. One of the things which many people find puzzling is that racial prejudice always seems to have an adverse effect upon people of African heritage, but does not seem to hold back those from South or East Asia. This is frankly a little bit odd. A little while ago, the Runnymede Trust, a British charity which spends its time stirring up discontent among minorities, was outraged about racism in employment. Figures released by the Office for National Statistics this spring showed that over 40% of young black people were unemployed, compared to just 17% of young white people. Halima Begum, the director of the Runnymede Trust, said she was absolutely appalled by the figures. They don't just reconfirm that the pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on our young black and ethnic minority communities, they confirm the government has completely abrogated its duty of care, in particular to black British families and their children. This is interesting. It is not ethnic communities which are suffering these high levels of unemployment, of course. It is specifically black people. Black people are more likely to be out of work, and when they are working, they earn less than other people. Not only do they earn less than white people, they also earn less than Indians. Does racism account for this? Material success in life is of course not entirely brought about by our own industry and thrift. A good start in life certainly goes a long way towards helping a young person along a trajectory which leads to working in a high status profession, which in turn usually brings about financial stability and a good standard of living. Not everybody in society starts from the same position. It is by looking at those who did start from the same position that we might glean some insight into the sort of things which could bring about poverty and other actions which might mitigate or even reverse that unfortunate and undesirable condition. What about those people who arrive in a foreign country with no money at all and little more than the clothes which they had on their backs? How do they and their families do? In Britain during the 1950s, 60s and 1970s, many people arrived from former colonies like the islands of the Caribbean and the countries of the Indian subcontinent, India and Pakistan. Families of Indian heritage also came to Britain from Africa, having felt the need to leave countries such as Kenya and Uganda. Those leaving Uganda came to Britain as refugees, having been stripped of all their wealth and belongings. It is impossible to track the origins and progress of all families belonging to various nationalities or ethnic groups, but we are certainly able today to see how well they are doing relative to the average British citizen. According to the Office for National Statistics, or ONS, a department of the United Kingdom's government charged with collecting and publishing data on life in the British Isles, there is a great disparity between how those who came from Indian families are doing as opposed to black people who came primarily from Africa and the Caribbean. The figures for income between 2016 and 29 make fascinating reading. The highest incomes, more than £1,000 a week, are earned by 28% of British people. There is a wide variation, though, between the ethnic groups who make up that average. Two figures are of special interest. Among those of Indian origin, 46% are earning at this highest rate, while only 20% of black people are doing so. The percentages are reversed the lower down the income scale one moves. Looking at those who earn between £300 and £399 a week, which makes up just 11% of the population, it is observed that 6% of Indians fall into this bracket, set against 15% of black people. We note too that rates of unemployment for those of Indian origin are half those for black people. The figures for January 2021 show that 8% of black people were out of work, while only 4% of those of Indian heritage were in this position, roughly the same as the percentage of unemployed white people. Once again, we notice, or we can remark, that if racism is really to account for this greatly increased proportion of unemployed black people, then it is a very selective kind of racism, one which affects Africans and Caribbeans but not Indians. What are we to make of such disparity of income and unemployment? The first thing to remember is that none of these people came from long-established and wealthy British backgrounds. It may well be that the children of an English duke or banking magnate come from families with inherited wealth stretching back to the 18th century, but that's not the case with almost any person in Britain from an Indian or black family. The overwhelming majority came to the country in search of better fortune than they enjoyed in their place of birth. Any differences in income are likely to be rooted in their attitude and behaviour after they arrived at their chosen destination. Anybody buying a newspaper at a privately owned shop in England, that is to say somewhere which is not a branch of a supermarket or chain of garages, would have noticed that the odds are that the proprietor is likely to come from a family with its origins in the Indian subcontinent. Conversely, it may be noticed that no such shops are run by black people. This is also the case in parts of cities which are predominantly black. Even in those districts, it is Indians who own and run the small shops. This is curious, and a personal anecdote might shed light on how this situation arose in at least some cases. In August 1972, the leader of the African country of Uganda, Idi Amin, ordered the expulsion of around 80,000 people of Indian heritage who were living in the country. This order was made on the grounds that the Indians, mostly Gujarati Hindus, were disloyal and engaged in dubious commercial practices. Many were running small businesses. Those who left Uganda were penniless, the government of that country having seized all their assets before deporting them. Over 27,000 of the refugees came to Britain. Among them was a young man who was just 17 years of age. This boy, for he was scarcely more than that, decided he wanted to run a business of his own in England. For the first few years after arriving in Britain, the young Ugandan nation worked ferociously hard in factories and any other jobs in order to raise the money to buy the lease of a small shop. He worked almost every waking hour to achieve this end. The shop was a newsagent's in North London on the Holloway Road. He married, and he and his wife devoted their lives to the shop. It meant being ready at 5 a.m. to take delivery of the morning newspapers and then staying open later than any other local shop in order to attract customers. After they closed at night, there was paperwork to be done, tax returns to fill in, VAT to deal with. They had 2 sons over the next few years. By the time the boys were of school age, the couple managed by the most stringent economies to send them to an independent, fee-paying school. After all, they had no time to go out anywhere themselves and nothing else on which to spend the money. 40 years later, and one of these boys is a consultant at a well-known London hospital, and the other is a successful solicitor. In a single generation, the family has leapt from a man who was a poorly educated factory worker to middle-class prosperity for his children. Many similar stories could be told about those of Asian heritage who left an African country with literally nothing, but very few such tales about black Africans who also came to Britain with nothing. This is also the case with the majority of immigrants and their families from the Caribbean. It is this which explains why 46% of people in Britain from Indian families are in the top bracket for income, but fewer than half as many black people. None of this will come as a surprise to any reader, or indeed viewers, nor is it unknown to the British government. Instead of thinking hard about the reason for the gap in incomes and standard of living between those whose roots are in South Asia and those whose families are from Africa and the Caribbean, the aim of most policies which aim to address the discrepancy in prosperity is simply to rig the figures. I can think of many reasons why Indians prosper more than black people in Britain, and it has nothing to do with racism. Hard work, delaying gratification, and taking responsibility for one's life have more to do with the unequal outcomes for these two ethnic groups. Until we start talking about the real reason that black people are falling behind in Britain, there is very little chance that we'll be able to remedy the situation.